Hello and welcome to the concluding session, number 4 of the second annual Completed Life Fall Conference. My name is Sarah Kiskadden-Bechtel and I am the Program Director for the Completed Life Initiative, and I will be your host today. At the Completed Life Initiative, we promote self-determination and dignity at the end of life. If you are new to our event programming, please feel free to explore our video archives on our website after today's event at www.completedlife.org. Our second annual conference has examined core elements of medical aid in dying. Session 1 explored what happens after legalization of assisted dying in the United States. Session 2 explored how the legislative landscape within the United States has shifted over the past 30 years and where it might be headed. And most recently, last Thursday's Session 3 explored how significant barriers to access impact diverse communities and how to perhaps remedy these barriers for better increased access. Whether you are new to our Completed Life community or are a returning attendee, we invite you to come prepared to ask lots of questions. These sessions are invaluable learning tools meant to empower you to have an informed conversation for yourself and with your loved ones about the question, what does it mean to live a completed life? Today, with esteemed end-of-life scholars Asunción Álvarez del Río, Ph.D., and Lucas Correa Montoya, J.D., Session 4 concludes our conference by highlighting how other cultures are maneuvering end-of-life practices. As we look at existing policies in Mexico and Colombia, we consider how advocates in countries other than the United States navigate end-of-life planning within the global conversation of the Right to Die movement, and with specific regard to the implementation of medical aid in dying. A little background on our speakers. Asunción Álvarez del Río holds a master's degree in clinical psychology and a PhD in bioethics. She's the professor in the Faculty of Medicine at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, or UNAM for short. She tutors and teaches in the Postgraduate Studies Department in the Faculty of Medicine of Philosophy and Psychology at UNAM. Her lines of research concern death in medical practice and end-of-life decisions. She co-authored an article titled Euthanasia in 1998 and has authored other works regarding euthanasia and the practice and ethics from 2005. She also co-authored a work called A Goodbye in Harmony in 2015 and co-authored The End-of-Life Medical Decisions in Patients with Alzheimer's Disease in 2017. Books in Spanish specifically. Asunción is president of the Colegio de Bioética, AC in Mexico, and is vice president of the World Federation of Right to Die Societies. A big warm welcome to you, Asunción, for being here today. Thank you. Lucas Correa Montoya is a Colombian human rights attorney. He holds a JD and an LLM in International Legal Studies and Human Rights, and a Master of Urban and Regional Planning. He is the research director at the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights Lab, also known as Desk Lab, a human rights platform and legal firm aimed at advancing the right to die in Colombia and Latin America and other human rights issues. Lucas has worked in both the academic and public fields for more than 14 years. He has been involved in the coordination of legal clinic programs on human rights and disability. In the public sector, Lucas was the Under Director General, Advisor on Disability and Older Persons of the Unit for the Victims, a public and national agency in charge of attending, assisting, and redressing the human rights violations of those affected by the armed conflict in Colombia. His areas of research and interest are social rights, emerging human rights, strategic litigation, inclusive education, legal capacity, and the right to die. So a warm welcome to you as well, Lucas. Thank you for being here. Before we begin, please be aware that you may input your questions into the chat feature located in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We welcome your questions at any time throughout session 4, and later on we will turn to your questions for an interactive Q&A with our esteemed panelists. Also, if you'd like assistance with closed captioning, you may toggle on the box located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen that provides captioning for the spoken words of our event today. Throughout today's event, feel free to tag us in your social media posts and tweets. We are at Completed Life and hashtag Completed Life. And finally, the recording of today's event will be published after the conference concludes. All right, welcome to our audience. Thank you so much for being here, and hello to Lucas and Asunción. And let's begin with Asunción. Just a reminder that you're muted, and go ahead.
Now, good afternoon to everybody. I am going to share my presentation. So, put it bigger. Now it's ready. So, I'm very glad to be here, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity to talk about what happens in other places of the world, in Latin America specifically, and I also glad to share this with Lucas Correa, and well, I'd be interested in knowing also what are your interests to discuss in this opportunity. I want to say that while preparing this presentation, which is similar to ones I gave about 3 years ago, I realized that there have been important advances in progress in many countries. So, well, I'll talk about all this. The content is, in first place, a general view what is legal in Latin America regarding a patient's right to die. And then I will focus on which I know best, that is, what is legal in Mexico regarding a patient's right to die. And to see this, we begin to see the context of Mexico, the achievements we have, the challenges we have to face, and some conclusions. So I begin. Here is Latin America. And all the countries in blue are countries in which some progress, important progress, has been made regarding a patient's right to die. I say patient because it all refers to decisions in the medical context. And we see in the darkest blue, Colombia, which is the country in which more important progress has been made. And I won't talk about Colombia because we have Lucas here that will speak all about this country and all the process that has been made and what they have achieved, which is impressive, I would say. So I begin with Uruguay. In Uruguay, withholding and withdrawing life support treatment have been legal since 2009. And advanced directives have been recognized since 2014. Physician-assisted death is considered a crime. But it is interesting to say that judges in this country are authorized to forgo punishment of a doctor with honorable reputation who commits a homicide motivated by compassion. Anyway, there is currently a bill to legalize euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. I think that here is important to make just as clarification. We use in Latin American countries the term physician-assisted suicide because as far as it is related to a physician-assisted, we know it won't be a suicide, a violent suicide or an irrational suicide. So that's why we use the term, but we understand that there is another connotation mainly in the States about using this term, but the truth is the term we use, and this because the reasons I have given why we are used to this term, and we continue using this term. In Argentina, withholding and withdrawing life support treatment have been allowed in 2012 with the law of dignified death. Advanced directives have been recognized in 2012 as well, and they must be signed before a notary. After the decriminalization of the voluntary interruption of pregnancy in December 2020, the voluntary interruption of life is being contemplated. A draft law is almost ready to be discussed. There are two more. And it would regulate in the country the provision of aid to die with dignity, euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. The initiative bears the name of Lo Alfonso, after a man who had AIDS and died and couldn't die as he would have wanted with the help of a physician to have a dignified and safe and painless death. So that's why it bears that name. In Chile, withholding and withdrawing life support treatment have been allowed since 2012. An advanced directive had been recognized since then as well. And now, recently, the Chamber of Deputies approved a bill, it was last April, that regulates the dignified death through palliative care or euthanasia, which includes physician-assisted suicide. It must be now discussed in the Senate to become law. In Peru, withholding and withdrawing life support treatment have been allowed since 2009. Last January, the Superior Court of Justice ruled in favor of Ana Estrada's demand, the woman almost completely paralyzed. And in these sentences, the state recognized her right to assisted death. It's still to be ratified, though. Inspired by the case of Ana Estrada, an initiative to allow euthanasia has been drafted to regulate the right of a very ill patient to request medical help to end his or her life in specified cases. It includes recognizing advanced directives. Now we have less progress, but we see that in Brazil, withholding and withdrawing life support treatment had been allowed since 2006. Advanced directives have been recognized since 2012. We signed before a notary. And physician-assisted death is considered a crime. There are no initiatives to change this. In Panama, withholding and withdrawing life support treatment have been allowed since 2003. Advanced directives have been recognized as well since then, but physician-assisted death is considered a crime and no initiatives are to change this. So we have the rest of Latin America. In general, we can say that withholding and withdrawing life support treatments are not allowed. End-of-life care should be limited to palliative care. And this has to do with the great influence of the Catholic Church that commands respect for life from conception to a natural death. It's difficult to understand now natural death with all that medical attention does, but that's how Catholic Church puts things. So I will turn to Mexico. And as I said before, I'm going to give some context before going further. Mexico is a democratic and secular state. Catholic Church, mainly among other churches, plays an important role shaping opinion and public policies. Another important fact is that out of a population of 130 million, almost 50% is in poverty and do not receive adequate health care. So some people die of treatable diseases, but some die after receiving excessive treatment at the end of life. And if possible, some would have opted for physician-assisted death to end their suffering. Most of Mexicans die in the context of medical care, where more can be done to have a dignified death. But we Mexicans need to be more prepared to talk about it, which many people is not ready to do, even though Mexico is famous for its acceptance of death. You can see these pictures, how we celebrate death. And it's true that some communities preserve their traditions and are prepared to face death. But for most Mexicans, familiarity with death is limited to the day of the death. And the rest of the time, most people, including doctors, are not prepared to face it. This has caused more suffering, which has led many people, including legislators, to discuss the end of life and expand laws to make it better. So what do we have now? Withholding and withdrawing life support treatment have been allowed in Mexico City since 2008 and in all the countries since 2009. Advance directives have been recognized in Mexico City since 2008, signed before notary, and in all the countries since 2009. Terminal sedation has been allowed since 2014, maybe not with all the clarity that is needed, but it's an advance. And palliative care is mandatory since 2017, which of course is not enough to guarantee that everybody has access to palliative care. It is needed still a lot of human resources prepared to give this attention and the logistic needed to have the needed implementation to give it, but it means something that it is considered mandatory, as it means that it is a right that Mexicans should have. And in Mexico City, it was approved a right to die with dignity, considered as the ethical, logical continuity of a life lived with dignity. So this is in the new constitution of Mexico City that was published in 2017. According to a national survey led by DMD Mexico, El Derecho a Morir con Dignidad, a Right to Die organization, almost 70% of the population agreed that a terminal patient should be able to decide to hasten his death and get help from a doctor. And almost 70% of Catholics also agreed that a terminal patient should be able to decide to hasten his death. The survey was published in 2016. I have to say that since 2002, there have been several initiatives in Mexico, the country, and in Mexico City to legalize physician-assisted death with no success. What are the obstacles in Mexico? Well, the denial of death, the fact that most of physicians are not prepared to care for dying patients, talk with them. We have advancing laws, but some of them are confusing, and we have limiting laws that don't allow, for instance, physician-assisted death. And we have insufficient development of palliative care, and also lack of respect for patients' decisions, and the influence of the Catholic Church, limiting expanding rights. So, what are our challenges? Well, Mexicans must think about death and communicate how they would like to continue living. That would help, and prepare their advance directives. That would be so important. Medical students, the future physicians, should receive training to care for their patients at the end of life. We must not allow Catholic or other churches to influence on public politics, and get better laws and approve physician-assisted death. More and more people are interested in helping their loved ones to have the best end of life, and in having control over their own end of life. I mean, when the subject of end of life, the subject of physician-assisted death, there are expressions of more and more people that they want to have that control over their own end of life. And it's a fact that in Mexico, there are requests for physician-assisted death with some frequency. And, well, mainly this is a privilege of some patients that know who physicians could be in favor and are friends, so they could have the privilege of ask for this help. But of course, that is only a very privileged part of the population. So physician-assisted death is applied covertly and sometimes presented as terminal sedation. We are working to promote the legal and social changes so that Mexicans can opt for a dignified death, and in a more broad sense, a death in the best possible conditions according to the person's values, which includes, of course, the option of choosing when and how to die without added suffering. We are thinking that we should start in Mexico City. We are working on this, where a right to a dignified death has been recognized, but not guaranteed. And many people, including the Senate, wants to say that this can be guaranteed by palliative care, but we know that that is not enough. So we are planning to file, among other things, a judicial protection. So to have this recognized right really guaranteed. We are going so far now. So thanks. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Asunción. We have a question from the audience. Edmund is wondering, would you mind commenting on the efforts of the Catholic Church in those countries where progress is being made towards the dignified right to die, specifically in Peru, Argentina, and Chile? And he's wondering, why has the Catholic Church's impact been so much stronger in other Latin American countries?
I suppose Catholic Church tries to do the same everywhere, and I really think that it depends on what politicians and the society do to not allow the Catholic Church to have that influence. But Catholic Church would do that anywhere, and I'm sure in those countries the Catholic Church is also trying to influence, and it's more the work of the people there that impends that. And maybe it has to be with politicians, legislators that are not so much concerned about having a good impression for the Catholic Church. Maybe legislators that are themselves Catholics and are like that conflict of interests. So I think so. That is not what the Catholic Church does differently, but what the people, the politicians, do differently in those places.
Thank you. So without further ado, let's turn over to Lucas Correa Montoya for his presentation today before we dive further into audience questions. And to you in the audience, please feel free to keep your questions coming in the chat, and we'll turn to them more in depth after Lucas's presentation.
Perfect. So thank you very much. Thank you, Asunción, for your presentation, and thank you, Sarah, for your invitation to this conference and to us from Latin American countries and other places in the continent to expose and show what are the challenges, the efforts, and the different advances that we have reached or achieved regarding this issue. I will be presenting the Colombian experience. I will not share my screen, so you will be watching me trying to present these ideas in English with such a challenge for me to switch from speaking, advocating, and this issue in Spanish and trying to present it in English coherently and trying to express and to share what we know and what we fear and what we expect regarding this. So I will be presenting the Colombian experience. This is a rare example for the right to die as an emerging human right. As Asunción told us, Colombia is the most advanced country in the region. I even will say, including the US and Canada, the most advanced country in the whole continent, in the whole American continent, regarding this issue, where the right to die is fully recognized, fully enforced. And this is a rare example because when we compare us with Belgium or Luxembourg on the Netherlands, we are very, very far from this developed stage and this separation between the state and the church and other features of our context. However, we are in this, and I will try to explain how come, or the journey that we have, the path walk regarding this issue. Since a little bit of a presentation, Sarah already presented me, but since 2017, we in Desk Lab, in the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights Laboratory, we designed it and we are committed to one strategy that we name Take Control, or in Spanish, Toma el Control. This is a human rights strategy aimed at advancing and promoting the right to die in Colombia and in Latin America through information, resources, education, networking, social media, mass media, and the most important feature is strategic litigation. This is what we do. We are a human rights platform. We are a law firm. We provide legal services in a wide range of human rights issues, and the right to die is one of them. So the first question or statement that I would like to share with you is, how come the right to die emerged as a constitutional right in Colombia? And this is, I think, perhaps the most important feature of the right to die in Colombia. In Colombia, the right to die is a constitutional right. It's fully protected by the Constitution, and we ended up in this place through a very rare path. So the right to die in Colombia is a constitutional right, but it's not included in the Colombian Constitution. Our Constitution was adopted in 1991, and no mention to the to die or to death or to the right to die is included in the Colombian Constitution. Regardless of that, it is Colombian. It's a constitutional right. The second feature is that there is not a legislative text, a law, regarding the right to die in Colombia. There is no a law in Colombia. Asunción told us about the different efforts, all the continent-wide, regarding the legislative process. In Uruguay, in Argentina, in Chile, even in Colombia today, they are discussing a law regarding this issue, but there is not such a law available in Colombia, duly enacted or adopted. However, the right to die is still a constitutional right. The third one is that Colombia is not a liberal, nor a developed country, like such other places where the right to die is a full-fledged right. And we don't have, or Colombia is a place where a vibrant social movement on the issue is still lacking. We don't have a lot of organizations, social organization, or social leaders advancing this right. Despite these four features, not being included in the Constitution, not having a legislative law or text or a law, not being a liberal or developed country, and not having such a vibrant social movement, we have the right to die as a constitutional right, a protected constitutional right. How come? Well, this is the result of a judicial action. Many of you are from the US, and therefore, I guess you fully understand the way the judicial body creates the law. But this is very, very rare or atypical in the Latin American community, because in our case, all of the countries continent-wide in Latin America are civil law countries. What it means is that the law is mainly created by the legislative process or via the legislative process, not by the judicial process like in the US. But in the Colombian case, it has been the judicial, and namely the Colombian Constitutional Court, the main actor in this emerging process of the right to die. It was the Colombian Constitutional Court, it is the Colombian Constitutional Court, the one that has created this right, that has shaped its nature, and that has given us the possibility to enforce this right, regardless of the other features and the context of the Colombian situation. This process started in 1993, so it's an ongoing process. It started 28 years ago in 1993. And today, what we have is 11 decisions from the court that have shaped the right to die. The court has also forced the executive branch, our government, to act and to regulate the right. And therefore, we have 4 resolutions. A resolution is it's a norm that is not a judicial decision and it's not a law. So in between, we have the law, and that's the way to explain. So it's an administrative or an executive order, like to resemble the US, the executive orders that the US president may enact. So we have 4 resolutions or 4 executive orders, 11 decisions from the court, and 4 resolutions embody the right to die in Colombia. So through this process, the Colombian Constitutional Court has recognized the right to die as a fundamental and constitutional right. Therefore, is at the same level of other fundamental rights or human rights or constitutional rights, whatever name we choose, such as the right to live, the right to freedom, the right to self-determination, the right to property, and so on and so forth. It is at the same level of protection and importance. It has also been named as an autonomous right, a full standing right, that is not dependent of other right or of other legal principle, such as life or such a human dignity. That's the way we call in Spanish a completed life. We can say that I will say that there are synonyms when we talk about the completed life. When we translate it into a Spanish mindset, we will talk about a life with dignity or a dignified life. And it has also been named and recognized as a multidimensional right. So the right to die offers a great range of options regarding the end of life and death. It is not only a right to euthanasia, it is a right to choose and to decide how the end of life must be or might be, and people might choose from a different range of options that I will discuss a little bit later in this presentation. The legal reasoning behind the right to die in Colombia is that life must be lived within the realm of dignity, where anyone can live a fulfilling existence and decide with full autonomy or self-determination, not only how to live, but also how and when such life should come to an end, or as Asunción has called it, to hasten his or her own death. It's a right, and the right to die in Colombia nowadays encompasses 3 legal mechanisms that are related to or with Asunción just has show us in the Latin American region. So when we talk about the right to die, we are talking about the possibility to access to palliative care, but also to access what I call the limitation of therapeutical effort. And I would like to make a distinction because Asunción told us about the possibility of withholding or withdrawing life support treatment. And withholding and withdrawing life support system is included inside or within the limitation of a therapeutical effort, but it goes beyond. It has a broader, or it encompasses a broader spectrum. That is, the right to die in Colombia makes it possible for a patient or a citizen to decide not beginning or changing or interrupting any medical treatment or procedure, even when that might be hastened or accelerated, but not directly caused. So the discussion here is not framed only in life support treatment, but it encompasses a broader range of options that are very, very important in cases like heart disease or cancer or other situation where when the medical condition or the health condition might not be that deteriorated or complicated, but still the patient or the citizen might want to decide upon treatment even when that might be accelerated or hastened. And the third mechanism that is encompassed within the right to die is medical assistance in dying via euthanasia. Euthanasia is fully legal in Colombia, is fully regulated, and people already access this kind of procedure. We have 178 cases reported legal euthanasia or legally performed euthanasias in Colombia since 2015, and it is a growing up procedure once years, and the process has been strengthened. So those are the three legal mechanisms that are available in Colombia. Today, physician-assisted suicide in Colombia is unlawful. It's a criminal offense for a medical practitioner to assist and inform a patient regarding suicide or regarding the right to die via the suicide option or mechanism. However, from Desclaf, we are leading an impact litigation strategy to decriminalize the physician-assisted suicide in Colombia, because it doesn't make any sense, a legal sense, that while medical assistance in dying via euthanasia is fully legal, physician-assisted suicide is still regarded as an unlawful practice. But today, a physician or a medical practitioner cannot legally assist anybody to commit suicide. This is an ongoing process and will be a challenge that I will review or readdress at the end of this presentation. So the judicial journey for this, or for a full-fledged right to die, has been a bumpy ride and a very complicated process in front of the Colombian Constitutional Court. However, it has been also a very spontaneous journey. What I mean here is that there is not a social movement behind these cases. Out of the 11 decisions from the court, only 2 of those decisions, have behind this vibrant social movement, and they are very recent. But from 1993, it was about cases of anonymous citizens that started all over Colombia and ended up in the capital, in the Colombian Constitutional Court, opening the discussion regarding or about that. So anonymous citizens placed along a path of 28 years of experience that has resulted in what we have now. It all started in 1993 when the court, for the first time, acknowledged the possibility of refusing treatment, particularly or namely refusing cancer treatment, as a possibility protected by the Constitution, and a protection that derived from the right to self-determination, autonomy, and dignity. So all of the discussion regarding the right to die in Colombia started not with palliative care, not with medical assistance in dying or euthanasia, but with what we call the limitation of therapeutical effort, the possibility for a person to determine or to decide what kind of procedure will get or will not get. But in 1997, we have this turning point case, and it was in that year where the court legalized euthanasia. The way it happened is that some citizen challenged the criminal code, and the court ended up legalizing euthanasia, excluding a criminal offense that was called Ph.D. I don't know how to say that in Spanish, but assassination, when someone kills somebody because of out of pity. The court will say that this kind of criminal offense should not exist within the criminal code, and it was unconstitutional to punish a medical practitioner that will help another fellow citizen to die, and in doing so, the court recognized the right to die as a full-fledged constitutional right. The court, this is very, very important. Through decision C-239, 1997, the court not only legalized euthanasia, but also recognized a fundamental or a constitutional right to die. What we have here is a court saying that even though the Constitution, the Colombian Constitution, does not mention the right to die directly, there it is implicitly included or is part of the Constitution because it encompasses a right to an autonomous death or a self-determined death. So that's the starting point. We have in 1993 this decision regarding the possibility of refusing treatment, and in 1997 the possibility or the legalization of euthanasia via the judicial process. Today, what we have when we focus on euthanasia as a mechanism to access medical assistance in dying, sorry for the, my notes, here they are. So euthanasia can be legally performed in Colombia by a physician when 3 criteria are met. The first one is that the person must have a grave and incurable disease or illness. From 1997 to 2021, this year, 3 months ago, it was required also to have a terminal illness or an illness in a terminal stage. But such requirement that was created in 1997 was eliminated by the court in a recent decision from this year, where the court just acknowledged that asking or imposing a person to wait until his or her illness will be in a terminal stage amount as a form of torture and a situation that goes against the right to freedom, the right to life with dignity, and of course, the right to die with dignity. So 3 months ago, in July, or 4 months ago, the court just excluded this requirement of having a terminal illness. And today, what we need to have from a medical perspective is a grave and incurable illness or disease. This situation opens the possibility for a lot of situations or medical conditions to allow any to ask or request procedure. The second criteria is to being exposed or having a great physical or psychological suffering. So you not only need to have an illness or a grave or incurable disease, but you also have to suffer from this great physical and psychological suffering. And this is a very subjective, and this is a personal and subjective idea. And it is anyone that is asking for the procedure is them who has to judge and decide what is insufferable and what goes against their own idea of dignity. So this is a very, very subjective issue. And what we have within our health system is that anybody that requests euthanasia is asked to kind of judge its own life and experience and decide whether or not this experience or their life experience goes or not against their idea of dignity. I don't know if I'm being clear with this, but this is the most important requirement in Colombia because it goes or it supports an idea that is not the doctor the one that is entitled to allow or not medical assistance in dying, but is the person, the one that must be at the center of the decision or at the procedure. And it's their evaluation or judging of their life experience, the one that should tackle or open up the decision of accessing an assisted death. And the third requirement is to expressed, that consent is free, informed, and without any kind of doubt. So it has to be a completed and informed decision, as any decision regarding the health process. So this is the situation right now in Colombia, and these three requirements have to be met in order to access for a physician-assisted death via euthanasia. In 2014, I'm coming to an end right now. So in 2014, the court established a step-by-step process to access euthanasia. So from 1997 to 2014, what we had was a fully recognized right to die, but no legal procedure or not step-by-step process to access euthanasia. What happened in this 17-year time was that many euthanasias were practiced within the private realm. So people accessed euthanasia, had to pay for the process, have to look for the doctor, and the procedure was not widely available. And therefore, some parts of the most privileged Colombian society had access to the procedure, but a full range or not privileged part of the society had no way to access the procedure. So in 2014, the court had a major case on this, on the many barriers that my fellow citizens faced before the health system, and the same court, because the legislative body of the Congress hasn't legalized or regulated the right to die, established their own process and their own rules and a step-by-step process to access euthanasia. So via decision T 907 from 2014, the court clarified the responsibility of the health system to provide the procedure. So it is you, the Colombian health system, that has to provide the euthanasia, and it must be for free. And the court created a committee on the right to die within every single service provider, and this committee is the one entitled to study the request and, after the reviewing process, deciding upon the procedure. Created also a 10-day term to review and decide upon the request. So when any Colombian asks the health system for accessing euthanasia, any person must receive a decision, a positive or negative decision regarding the procedure in 10 days. Sometimes this term is fully observed, other times it is not, but it is a very short term, and it is designed to create a very, very expedite or fast process in order to get a response or an answer for the request, so people don't have to wait a lot of time. And at the end, in this year, the court also created a mandate to register all the procedures, so we can know where the procedure of euthanasia is being practiced, the kind of person that is practiced upon, the age, the geographical location, the kind of illness or disease, whatever. A lot of different data is already registered, so we can have this process being more accessible and transparent to the public opinion and to the legal system as well. At the end, we have 5 challenges ahead. Despite being the most advanced country in the region regarding this procedure, the situation is far from perfect. The first challenge that we have or we face is to maximize the positive view of the Colombian population regarding the right to die. What we know is that 72% of the population support the right to die and euthanasia, even when as Asunción told us, the Catholic Church and other Christian churches in Colombia are very powerful and they have the power to shape public opinion. Despite of that, the 72% of the Colombian population support this right and goes against what the church told us to believe. The second challenge is to monitor and tackle barriers that are still imposed by the health system. Despite having 11 decisions from the court and 4 executive orders, the health system still impose a lot of different barriers upon those who ask for the procedure. For example, sometimes we have lack of response, late response, lack of health providers, and other barriers that are imposed in the medical setting. And we need to make them visible, to monitor them and tackle, so the health system can overcome these kind of barriers or just not create those barriers. The third challenge is to have concrete and specific rules for the second mechanism of the right to die. What I told us, I call the limitation of therapeutical effort, or somehow what we also call the withholding or withdraw life support treatment. What we have here is that this is an option, this is a legal option, but we lack a complete and concrete rules regarding that. So what we have now is that people and medical practitioners do not know what to do, how to do it, when to act, and at the end, this creates a barrier that is imposed over the population that is asking for accessing the right to die via the limitation of therapeutical effort. The fourth challenge is to legalize physician-assisted suicide. As I told you, it makes no sense to have a fully recognized right to die. It doesn't make any sense to have a legal right to euthanasia, or that medical assistance in dying is fully recognized, but still physician-assisted suicide, still it's being regarded as a crime. So we are putting an effort here to legalize this. And the last challenge is to spread the knowledge and use of advanced directive regarding the end of life and its legal use. Because what we have in Colombia, and that will be my last idea, or the last idea that I will be sharing with you this evening, is that even in Colombia, when this right has a history or has walked a path of 28 years, still the Colombian population they don't know about advanced directive, their importance, the legal requirement, the legal use, and at the end, we have with the legal to access the right to die, but a barrier that without an advanced directive, the possibilities to make decisions regarding the end of life must be shortened or might be a little reduced instead of broad when you have access to information regarding the importance of advanced directive. So those are the challenge and the main ideas that I had prepared for this presentation, and I hope I was clear regarding our path, and I'm ready to ask the questions that are there in the chat.
Thank you so much, Lucas. That was a wonderful presentation, and I had a little bit of a glitch periodically in hearing you, but for the most part, it came through strong, and so thank you so much. So we'll jump into questions, and Asunción, feel free to jump in with yours as well. So just a follow-up question from Edmund in the chat. He's wondering, what has been the position of the Colombian Medical Association on euthanasia, especially with regard to the Hippocratic Oath, which the American Medical Association cites in its opposition in the United States?
So we have a very diverse medical community, and what we have is a part that is highly conservative and that goes against this procedure, and other part of the medical community is open to discussion, and we work with them. At the end, no medical practitioner can be forced to perform the procedure. So there's something called in Spanish that I will translate, but it can make no sense. That is the object of conscience. Is the possibility to refuse to perform the procedure because goes against my beliefs. It's a constitutional right as well. And the way we manage it is that the right of the medical practitioner is protected. Nobody can be forced to act against what he or she believes. But there is also a duty for the health system to assure that non-objectors are medical practitioners that are not objectors are available. So this kind of situation may not constitute a barrier or hinder the possibility to access euthanasia. I don't know if I was clear, but that's kind of the position is very, very broad, and we have very conservative doctors, but also very liberal doctors that are fully aware and available to perform the procedure.
Thank you. So Gary is wondering, is the Papal Concordia still in effect? And perhaps for our audience, you could elaborate on what Papal Concordia refers to.
Oh my
And he's
goodness! So I
wondering
have to explain.
if so, how does it impact the right to die?
This is a very, very complicated question because I need to explain what the Papal Concordia is. I know what it is. I didn't know the name of it in English. No, the Papal Concordian is not in effect. What is the Papal Concordian? I'm trying to make sense in English with this. Before our constitution from 1991, the Colombian state had a treaty with the Holy See that gave the Holy See and the Catholic Church a lot of power over the state, over the law. And this was a reality for more than a century. But before the Colombian Constitution of 1991, we have a secular state, and the Catholic Church is not the church of the state, it's not the preferred church. We have not a church. And somehow the power of the church was diminished. So the church is it's not in charge of the whole system, but still has power. So the Papal Concordia it is not in effect, but still we fight the power of the church regarding a lot of issues in our country. This is also real for the US and real for many of the Latin American countries.
Thank you. So I'm wondering, just to clarify, you mentioned that physician-assisted suicide is illegal in Colombia, but euthanasia is not. It's a constitutional right with the Colombian Constitutional Court. In the U.S., it's very much the opposite, as you are aware. And at our last session, session 3, we had Lonnie Shavelson here with us, and he's currently exploring in California the right to enable people who have physical disabilities, such as patients with ALS, who don't have enough strength to press on the plunger to self-administer the medication. And of course, that's towards the self-administration criteria within California's End-of-Life Options Act. So I was wondering if you could elaborate regarding how do patients with physical disabilities in particular, how are they treated in the Colombian system, and how are there aids available to help them navigate the system, especially with perhaps accessing physicians who are providers? What are your thoughts?
The intersection of medical assistance in dying and disability is a very complicated and tricky intersection in the Colombian setting. I would divide it in two kind of situations. The first situation will be when you have a person that was not a person with a disability, and it for example, anybody with ILS or Alzheimer that in an earlier stage expressed their consent or created an anticipate directive, and afterward their legal capacity or their capacity to decide was diminished, and therefore we have this comparison or we have this reference of, or we have this advanced directive. In those cases, we have not a problem because the disability might not be an issue here, and the decision that is included in the advanced directive will be fully legal and can be enforceable by the peer support or the family or whatever, any person that can support the person. So in those cases where the disease or the medical condition might end up in diminishing the legal capacity or the possibility to express their consent, we have to focus on the advanced directive issue. But the possibility is there, and I don't know if many, but a lot of procedures, euthanasia procedures, are practiced upon persons with disabilities that, for example, are in a very, very complicated situation, but express their decision in an anticipate directive. But the other situation is when we have a person with an intellectual disability that cannot or is not possible for them to fully express their consent. Because, for example, when we are talking about Down syndrome, some cases of Down syndrome, or some cases of autism, when there is doubt about the consent. In those cases, the situation in Colombia is still very shallow, and the health system tends to refuse the procedure to be practiced upon this second situation of this kind of people with disabilities, because there are mainly doubts about their capacity of possibility to express their consent. However, Colombia is also a very, very advanced country in the recognition of legal capacity and the implementation of the United States Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. And we have a figure that is called the support or deciding, support in deciding. So to some extent, the family can support the decision, but at the end, when it's doubt, or when there are doubts about the consent, the health system will end up refusing the procedure.
Thank you. So Faith is wondering, do you have a position on the completed life? That is, someone without a terminal disease or condition who believes their life is completed because they are no longer able to do the things which gives their lives meaning and value. And this really ties into our mission here at the Completed Life Initiative of, suppose you remove terminal illness from the equation, and someone views their life as completed. So following on with Faith's question, they can no longer contribute to society or live independently and do not wish to become quote unquote burdensome to the family or the state. What are your thoughts and perhaps the views largely in Colombia?
Well, my personal position is in favor of it. I am fully in favor of this perspective where no medical condition is needed and the decision is a fully self-determined or autonomous decision. This is from a philosophical point of view. So I'm up to it. But from a strategic point of view, we fight for that in a very step-by-step process. So we are up to demedicalize, that's how I will call it in English or in Spanish. So to demedicalize the process and the medical influence regarding the decision on euthanasia. But I understand that it is not plausible or possible to achieve this step in the short term, and that we have to go step by step. And that's why this year and the last year, we fight up to exclude the terminal condition. Right now, we fight for our Ministry of Health not to introduce additional barriers regarding the definition of grave and incurable disease, to open up this kind of situation. We are about to advance cases on mental health where a person with a complicated mental issue asks for the procedure. But I think this is a process, and we have to go step by step so we can have low-hanging fruits, to call it some way, and we can advance little by little, because what we have in our context is that this is a very liberal position that is not necessarily shared by the majority of the population. That is, I would not like to say property, but it is an issue of the most privileged part of the Colombian society that is also liberal, and but we don't have a Congress where this kind of discussion can be held, and so we have to go step by step. At the end, we expect to reach that point, but we share this idea or position of a completed life where no medical condition is imposed to access medical assistance in that, or assistance in that.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to Asunción for your thoughts on the completed life as well.
I'm completely in favor also, and I would say, even if only because the person wants to finish her life, because that person thinks that he wants to end the life in that moment. Maybe that is a good moment. Maybe precisely is not arriving to a condition in which that person wouldn't like to live. So I think it is a way to say I am the owner of my life, the one who writes my history, and it should end here. I completely agree with that. I would like that for myself. But I think it's very complicated to have that granted by a state. I think it is the practicalities of that I think it's complicated. I know that in the Netherlands there is an initiative to have that, in which it is not necessary that the person have a medical condition. It's just because that person wants to end the life. And so far, I think that we are not going to see, maybe in the Netherlands, and that would mark a first step for other countries, but I think for some time the laws are not going to grant that. And so I would say that people convinced of having that right will have to manage to do it by themselves. Really, I think so. But maybe we will arrive sometime in which that would be possible, and we will sort out the difficulties of the practicalities of that. That's what I think. And I wanted to ask Lucas 2 questions. No, because you were saying about the advance directives that you can't ask for euthanasia through an advance directive. And want to know if that includes that you ask euthanasia for an advance directive to be applied, to be granted, when you become completely demented. Is that included, that condition?
Yes, it is also possible, and it is the most important decision that you can make in Colombia through an advance directive. You can ask for euthanasia, and you can express your anticipate consent on euthanasia. And what happens is that we have the advance directive that says yes to euthanasia, and somehow in the future, when the person needs it and cannot express their decision directly, some other person can ask for the procedure and start this step-by-step process, and the procedure can be actually performed.
Do you have any cases, because there are so many difficulties, when to do that, when to apply that advance directive? Is that demented enough? I think there are some complications reported elsewhere. So, is there a case?
In these cases, what we have saw is, or what you have seen is that the role of the family is at the center point. So along with the directive, with the advance directive, there is a family that is saying, my father, for example, or my mother will not want this for he or her. And in this situation, the decision will be to access euthanasia. And we have this advance directive where they said it, and that's the way it happens. So the key here is to have a very, very open family and support, and to express the decision at the dinner table. That's how we say it. So it is not about signing a document and filing it in a folder and waiting for the document to be used, but you have to discuss these decisions with your family, with your parents, with your siblings, with your kids, so they know how to act with this advance directive. There are a lot of cases where anyone just expressed their consent via an anticipate directive, and afterwards, 5 years later, 10 years later, the family used the advance directive to ask for the procedure and to start the process, and that will ended up with the euthanasia procedure. Of course, there are a lot of the other examples where this possibility to express consent is not diminished. So you have cancer, or you have ILS, or heart failure, and you still can express your consent. And those are a lot of other cases, but it is possible and fully legal in Colombia to ask euthanasia via an anticipate directive or advance directive.
Thank you. Asunción, did you have a follow-up question for Lucas? You mentioned 2 questions.
Because there is another very interesting characteristic in the Colombian law, that euthanasia is also allowed to minors, right?
Yes, and I didn't mention it because it will take me hours to explain this, but since 2017, the Colombian Constitutional Court allowed euthanasia to be performed upon minors, but no legal procedure has been performed. So nobody, no minor has accessed euthanasia in Colombia. It is a very complicated process. There are a lot of, it is not as easy as the case that I just show you in this presentation regarding those who are not minors. But it is a legal possibility, but no case, no euthanasia procedure, legal euthanasia procedure has been performed over or upon a minor.
Okay.
Thank you. Arlene is wondering, she's referring to a recent article published in the New York Times about a Colombian woman severely disabled by ALS who had much difficulty accessing the right to euthanasia. And she's wondering whether you're familiar with the case, and if so, was the woman featured in the article ultimately successful in her desire?
Actually, Arlene, we are the lawyers of Marta. Marta is the woman that was all over the news, not only the New York Times, the Washington Post, the BBC. We are her attorneys. And what I can tell you is that, yes, the process was successful. She is still alive. She hasn't decided upon the date. She is taking some weeks, even months to decide. After what happens is that the procedure was approved and the Ministry of Health intervened and some barriers emerged. But at the end, with the decision of a judge, the procedure was approved again. But Marta is taking some time. So no pressure here. She is able to decide whenever she wants the procedure to take place. And at the end, she will decide. Her decision is there. She wants the procedure to be performed, but after the situation and the global situation regarding this case, she is taking some weeks, even months, and perhaps the procedure will be performed next year after Christmas. So, but the case was successful, and her desire is still there.
Thank you. Janet is wondering, does the Colombian criteria of grave and incurable disease or illness extend to including mental illness or mental illnesses that are grave and incurable, but not inherently terminal?
Yes, it does, and it includes mental illness. Not any mental illness. At the end, it is for anyone that is asking or asking for the procedure to decide what kind of illness and the impact in their life. So yes, it includes mental illness. We will see cases in the next months or years regarding this very, very complicated issue, but it is completely possible.
Thank you. And a follow-up question from Janet. She mentions that, Lucas, when you speak of euthanasia, is that limited to what was previously called passive euthanasia in the United States, or does it extend to active euthanasia as well?
When I talk about euthanasia, I'm speaking of active euthanasia. I'm not speaking about passive euthanasia. What we used to call passive euthanasia is what I call the limitation of the therapeutical effort. But when I speak about medical assistance in dying via euthanasia, is the act of causing death by a medical practitioner. So what I'm speaking about is what we used to call active euthanasia. We don't use those concepts right now, but that is what I'm talking about, active euthanasia.
Thank you for the clarification. Arlene has a follow-up question, whether about the woman Marta who you just spoke of, whether you could elaborate on the barriers that arose in terms of her access.
I will try to explain the case on Marta. Marta is a Colombian woman who is a 50-year-old, and she has ALS. She asked for the procedure, and the procedure was granted without any kind of barrier and any legal difficulty. But after that, and she set a date, October 10th, for the procedure. And after that, with our help, she decided to go to the media and tell her case, because she is also a Catholic woman who believes that being a Catholic does not go against the euthanasia. She thinks that the love of God is so immense or big that she is not here to suffer, and it is compatible with her faith. So she wanted to tell that. And we wanted to tell the Colombian public opinion that it's possible to access euthanasia without barriers, that our legal system is prepared and the procedure is performed without difficulties. But before the media exposure, not only in Colombia, but all over the world, the conservative proportion or part of our society and the Ministry of Health decided to intervene and ask the health provider to stop the procedure. And they did it. So 3 days before the date, she received a letter saying your procedure is cancelled, without any legal reasoning, without any kind of explanation. So we have to sue the clinic, the health provider. And after that, the court gave us the reason, or gave Marta the reason, and said, what you did was unlawful, and you have to perform the procedure that you already had been, that you already approved. And after that, when the procedure was canceled, the case was all over the news again, all over the New York Times, the front page of the Washington Post, the BBC, and this kind of media exposure overwhelmed her. She had to go to the countryside to rest. She's okay. She's a very driven woman, but it had an impact on her life and mental health and tranquility. Or so after that, after a month, the court gave her the reason and told the health provider, you have to perform the euthanasia. And after that, when the health service provider asked her for a date, she told them, when I have a date, I will inform it to you. And now you have to wait for me, because I'm in no rush. I'm fully decided, but I'm not in no kind of rush. And that is what happened here. After that, Christmas is coming, her son is graduating from college, and she just decided to wait, and that she needed 2 more months. And the Colombian rules said that it's for the person to decide the date, the time, and to think it over, think again, say no, and there is no legal consequence because of that kind of decision. And now she has to decide the date and the time, and the procedure will be performed the date and at the day or in the time that she decided. And she decided not to inform the public opinion or the press the date, because she fears that it can happen all over again. So when the media ask us for the date, is she still alive? We say yes, she's still alive, and she is deciding, and will not inform the date. What we are sure will happen is that after the procedure is performed, it will be all over the news again, but not with this kind of anticipation that ended up with this situation that she has to face.
Thank you. A question from Rebecca. She's wondering whether you can discuss in more detail the current case This actually might be the same case as Marta. Maybe you can help clarify. She doesn't mention that it's fully publicized in the New York Times and BBC and beyond, but the woman who was granted euthanasia and then withdrawn by that panel, what is the latest? And what do you think is behind the change decision? Perhaps they're the same case, perhaps not.
Yes, it is. It is. It is the same. What is behind is the pressure of the Ministry of Health. What we had here is that the ministry called the clinic to cancel the procedure, and the clinic said yes. That's what happened. That's an illegal situation here that ended up with the violation of her rights that were enforced by the court 15 days before, but that's what happened.
Wow, thank you. So a follow-up question from Rebecca, more specifically related to clarifying the distinction between physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia as it's defined in Colombia, where doctors perform euthanasia. For a U.S.-based audience primarily, she's wondering, how is this not physician-assisted suicide?
I'm not sure if I really understood the question. Like, what is the difference between euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide?
No.
We are not hearing you, Sarah.
She's wondering how is physician-assisted suicide different from euthanasia exactly? She's
The difference is
confused on the difference.
The difference is what you call the self-administration criteria. In euthanasia, it is the doctor who causes the death. It is the doctor who administrates those medicamentos, like drugs, to cause death. So the full responsibility is upon him or her. And it is the doctor who causes directly the death. In the case of physician-assisted suicide, it is the person that causes his own or her own death with the help or the assistance of the doctors that gives the drugs or the instructions of what to do in order to have a protected and suicide. That is the main difference, and that is what one is called euthanasia and the other one is called medical assisted suicide.
Thank you.
I don't know if I was clear.
Yeah. And Rebecca, if you have any clarifying questions, please let us know. Thank you, Lucas. So Faith has a follow-up question, and I'll just read it. Do you have any thoughts regarding why countries where there is no separation of church and state, such as yours, have made such advancements in this discussion versus the United States? You mentioned Colombia being behind the Netherlands, but clearly you are making serious progress. Why do you think that the US is encountering such resistance to all medical aid in dying legislation and cannot even use the word euthanasia? So let's start with Lucas and then go to Asunción.
I will clarify, Faith, that in Colombia, there is separation between the church and the state. Yeah, like in the United States, but still you have these contentious issues all over the courts. You have the U.S. Supreme Court, where you are about to decide on abortion on a court full of influence from the church, and the new justice is a Catholic justice. So we have a separation of the church and state, but the church is still very powerful. And not only the Catholic Church, but also other denominations. So what we fight here is to diminish the power of the church or the churches over the rule of law on what is considered law. In the case of Colombia, the explanation of these advances is because of liberal judges. It was the Colombian Constitutional Court, a court composed of 9 judges, that through the years decided upon this from a liberal perspective, from a secular perspective. US educated judges, European educated judges, liberal judges that gave us these kind of decisions. I think the resistance of the US might be the same resistance that the issue face all over the world, is that we are about, when we talk about medical assistance in dying, we are trying to make the decision at the center, view the situation from a secular perspective, think of a different kind of medical practitioners that are not denying the right to die, but enhancing the possibility of decide the end of life options. So that would be my thoughts on this. We are also, when we talk about euthanasia, there are a lot of concern regarding this term, and doctors will prefer other concepts. But because euthanasia is fully included in our legal system, there is no need to find other words to name it, because euthanasia is fully legal, even you like it or not. So that will be my thoughts on those questions, on that question, Faye. Thank you.
And over to Asunción, perhaps, to this question of why euthanasia is more accepted in countries like Colombia, where it's of course legal, but in the U.S. it's a word that we try to stay away from.
I think that as it is the case in most of Latin American countries, even though they are separated, the state from the church, I think that it has to be with what Lucas said, that they have really great judges in the Supreme Court. And they had, in the first place, it was very lucky. I always have thought of that. I'm always amazed of how all this began, that it arrived at the demand of a person saying that he wanted more penalty for the homicide by compassion, I think. Mm-hmm. And the judge said no, that there should be no pain at all. So it was all against what was expected. It was, so I think it has to be with that. For instance, in Mexico, we have had great advances in other subjects related to personal decisions, like the interruption of pregnancy. We have recently very important decisions by the court, like that decriminalizing abortion all over the country. That was not, it was a crime still. But we haven't had a case to present to the Supreme Court. And I would say we don't have such a trust like they have in Colombia. We wouldn't be so sure what would happen, but we haven't had a case like that. Like, I imagine a very ill person saying that would be offer her situation to give a case to the Supreme Court. That would be a beginning to that. As we haven't had that, maybe yes, we haven't had that. We search through the laws, through the Congress, and this is more difficult in general. Because because all the reason I already gave, and it has to do with the Catholic Church that wants to impose on politicians. So, but I also think that it is up to the society and to not allow that. So my confidence is that the same that has been gained in other complicated issues like abortion and same-sex marriage, that we have made a lot of progress, we could get that in relation to physician-assisted death, but we have to see.
Thank you. We have a follow-up question from Gary, and he's wondering how the current situation in Mexico differs from Colombia.
Okay.
Your thoughts?
Thanks, Gary, and nice to find you here. I think the great difference is that we don't have physician-assisted death as they have in Colombia. I think we have many similar situations related to the other ways to grant a dignified death, like palliative care and withholding and withdrawing life support and treatment in general. We are very much in the same situation, I think, with the same obstacles that there is not enough access to palliative care as much as we would like to have it, and maybe the same conflicts that, or similar conflicts that happens with physician-assisted death can happen in Mexico, maybe also in Colombia, with withholding and withdrawing life support treatments. Some physicians wouldn't be comfortable to do that, thinking that would be against their professionalism or against their ethics. I think there are all kinds of physicians are divided also as conservative and liberal. But the main difference is that we don't have physician-assisted death, and Colombia has it since 1997. That is a huge difference.
Absolutely. So just a question to circle back to the patient Marta. Someone's wondering, why Lucas in particular, do you think the health ministry felt pressured to override the granting of euthanasia to Marta? For example, in the politics of it, were there any pressures in particular?
It is because of a legal technicality that I will try to explain. What happened in the case of Marta is that she doesn't have a terminal illness. And the Colombian Constitutional Court decided to exclude this requirement on July 22nd. But the court decided that in a public hearing, but the actual text of the decision was not available. So what we have is that we used to know the decision of the court because it was expressed in a public hearing, and the court decided, like in the movies, I decided to exclude, but the legal text of the decision was not available. Traditionally, it takes about 3 months of this text duly revised, reviewed, and signed by the judges or the justices. And what happened in the public opinion of Colombia is that the decision of the court in July was so widespread. A lot of persons knew that they were able to ask the procedure because the terminal stage of the illness was no longer a legal requirement. So in the case of Marta, we submitted the request of euthanasia the very next day, on the 23rd of July, and we knew that the decision was not available. But the decision of the court was widely known. So what the ministry did was to use this legal technicality, because of the decision was not fully available, to ask the health provider to override or to refuse or to cancel the procedure. So this is what happened. So this is very exciting. and I'm gonna tell you this. I live in Bogota, but when this happened, I was in North Carolina. And there were no Wi-Fi because I was in the Outer Banks, seeing some lighthouses in the Atlantic coast of North Carolina. So this is what happened. It was Friday, 8 p.m., and the procedure was canceled. The Saturday noon, it was all over the news. and the Ministry of Health was saying the decision is not available, the procedure cannot be performed. Monday, 10 a.m., the decision is available. The court signed the decision, and the actual text of the judicial decision was available from Saturday noon to Monday 10 a.m. A process that takes the court about 3 months in order to make the decision fully public. So what happened is that the procedure was planned on this Sunday. So at the end, the rights were violated because the procedure was not performed on the day and the time that Marta decided, October 10, 7 a.m. Why on a Sunday? Because that's the day she attended the service. What 7 a.m.? Because she wakes up very early and that's the time when she wanted. So on Monday, the decision was available, but the health practitioner still denied the process. So we asked a judge to order the procedure. That's what happened. And that was the reason behind the influence of the Ministry of Health, because they created this barrier because it was fully known that terminal stage illness was no longer a requirement. It was fully informed by the court via Facebook in a public hearing. And at the end, the ministry was asking for the full document so the health system can act. Nowadays, this is what we have. We have a case right now where the decision is fully known, but the health system is still asking for a terminal condition. And those are the kind of barriers that we face every day. And we try for the health system to not impose a person to go before the judicial system in order to access euthanasia. But this is what happened in the case of Marta, or Marta's case.
Thank you. Wow. Well, I look forward to hearing more about Marta as we go, and I hope she experiences, the lack of public, exposure in the future. Hopefully, some enhanced privacy. But thank you so much for sharing. Let's turn to one last question before concluding remarks. We're turning towards the end of our time today, unfortunately. Just a last question from audience member Dean. He's wondering if you can comment about, in the US, we call it the FAST level 6 and 7 of Alzheimer's. So patients approaching the very, very end of Alzheimer's disease, and whether they can change their mind and then prefer feeding tube or whether advanced directives apply. So particularly to this question, how patients with Alzheimer's disease that it's very advanced, how they're regarded under laws of euthanasia in Colombia.
So when there is not an advance directive on this issue, this medical procedure will be performed, but the family can ask to limitate or even withdraw it. But because we do not have these specific rules that I was talking about regarding the limitation of therapeutical effort, it is for the doctor to decide, for the clinic to decide, and that the chances of getting a refusal to withhold or withdraw this kind of procedure are very high. So if you end up in a clinical or a conservative medical practitioner, you might face barriers. If you end up in a liberal clinic or with a liberal medical practitioner, you can ask for this and it will be performed. but the lack of rules upon this or about this creates these barriers and this kind of situation where you don't know what to do, how to do it, in what time to answer or how to proceed, and this make it harder in this kind of situations when death approaches.
Thank you. And specifically regarding hastening death, I know, Asunción, you mentioned this in your presentation as well regarding withholding or withdrawing life-sustaining treatment. We, at the Completed Life Initiative, we've been fortunate enough to host 2 events regarding voluntarily stopping eating and drinking with Timothy Quill, Judith Schwartz, Thaddeus Pope, and Paul Menzel. And I'm wondering, just as we turn towards the last 10 minutes that we have together today, just briefly, whether VSED is included within end-of-life considerations in Mexico and Colombia.
I have to say that each time I have the opportunity in lectures, in classes, I talk about this option that has not been discussed in Mexico. Really has not. That's the point. Has not been discussed. We don't know if. I know. Well, we know everybody has the right to say I don't want to eat and drink, but we know that person needs some help and some support. So we don't know what happens with that support because we haven't discussed that. We need to discuss that. So this must happen, or always, like in some places, depending on the position of the palliative care or the physicians. But this is again covertly. We haven't discussed it. We need to discuss it.
Thank you, Asunción. And Lucas, your thoughts briefly.
No, in this case, I share the opinion of Asunción. I would already say this is a discussion, a conversation that we must have and create some rules in order to guarantee the right to die in such cases.
Thank you both. And I'd like to invite your concluding remarks today. This has been an incredible and fascinating discussion about the right to die in Latin America, and hearing perspectives about both what's going on in various countries and the incredible progress that has been made by Colombia. So Asunción, may we start with you and then turn to Lucas?
Well, I wish that if I have an opportunity like this in 2 years, maybe I could put in darkest blue many other countries that are doing now efforts, including Mexico, because maybe I think Mexico is very complicated. We wouldn't begin with all Mexico, but we think that Mexico City could be. And I think it's very interesting that we have here this experience of talking to persons of Latin American, and it has been very interesting, and it has been like an invitation to do this more frequently. And it also has been very, very pleasant that we have been invited to this public from the States, to talk about what is happening in our countries. I appreciate that very much also. So thanks.
Thank you. And Lucas, please.
I would like to make 3 final remarks. In Colombia, we have these emerging human rights. So we have a road that we have walked, but I will point out 3 concepts that I think might be at the center of any kind of discussion. The first one is strategic or impact litigation regarding the right to die. In order, only by having and exposing cases before of the court or the judges, these changes can be made in our Latin American context. The second one is the role of mass media. It is not only that there is not only a need for advancing these cases before the court, but to make visible these cases all over the media with a face, with a case, and with a positive approach. What I call a positive approach is not an approach where death, suffering, or illness are at the center, but instead what might be or should be at the center is the person, their decisions, their lives. And I think this is a key issue of this kind of processes. And the third point that I would like to highlight is that we need to have dinner table conversations about this. This conversation must be held or in the dinner table, at the dinner table, with our parents, with our grandmother, our grandfather, with our kids, with our friends, so we can advance this kind of conversation in a regular, non-legal, non-medical setting. And with these 3 points, I will end up my intervention in this conference.
Well, thank you, Lucas Correa Montoya and Asunción Álvarez del Río. Thank you so much. It's been a delight and an honor to sit with you today virtually in this space of the Completed Life stage, and honored to host you. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise with our Completed Life audience. Thank you so much, and thank you to the audience for joining in today and submitting some fantastic questions. This concludes the second annual Completed Life Fall Conference. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for returning this year after attending our inaugural conference last year in fall 2020. Please stay tuned for an announcement about next year's annual fall conference. We just are delighted to have you along the journey with us. So, and please also continue to spread word about the Completed Life Initiative. We are growing our scope and our presence both nationally and internationally, and your word of mouth contribution and support means the world to us. So thank you so much. And I'd like to announce that we will shortly be launching the Completed Life podcast called The Voices of the Completed Life, coming in January 2022. So please stay tuned about that and get your AirPods, your headphones ready to tune in for that. So we welcome your narratives, your stories about what a completed life means for you or a loved one, and please reach out to us with any and all questions. So with that, I wish you a good day wherever you are in the world. Please take care, be well, and I look forward to welcoming you back next time for another Completed Life conversation. Goodbye.
Bye-bye, and thanks.